that I was technically unemployed. But I wasn't a job loser, right? I was a job what? Leaver. I left my old job. That's still considered unemployed, okay? Re-entrant. This is a person who was previously employed, hasn't worked for some time, and is now currently re-entering the labor force. Who's somebody I mentioned today that could fall into this category? My wife, exactly, okay? So you can make a note of that if you want. Re-entering. If I come home today and she goes, that's it, I'm going back to the workforce. I'm putting job applications out, I don't have a job yet, of course, I don't have any offers, then she would be that person, a re-entrant. And then new entrant. This is a person who has never held a full-time job for 2 weeks or longer and now is in the civilian labor force. Raise your hand if you have not ever had a paid job, but you're thinking about getting one this summer. That's you, right? That's you people. You're a new entrant for the first time. You will be entering the civilian labor force. So that's what those labels are. All right? Now, there are weaknesses to all these different measures of economic health. Okay? There are weaknesses to how we calculate the inflation rate, right? The CPI, because some people don't buy what a lot of other people buy. And their market basket looks different, right, than this standardized sampling. Same thing with unemployment rate, right? There are certain people who don't get counted. So one weakness, you need to know this, okay, but this is also in the book. One weakness of calculating the unemployment rate is who gets left out. Now, we're not talking about the military, we're not talking about people in mental hospitals, we're not talking about people in prisons. We're talking about, in addition to those people that get left out. The homeless, right. Now, understandably, it's not the easiest thing to track the homeless, right? But I think a lot of economists agree that we could probably make a better effort of recognizing that piece of society, and that's an obvious area where we could do a better job in, raising the standard of living for all people in our country. Same thing in other countries, right? So it doesn't count the homeless. What else? What's that? Immigrants. They're under the radar. What else?
Or like illegal ones?
Legal or illegal? Both of them.
Any immigrant?
This is not to say that no immigrants are ever counted. But it's easy, like, I tease her by using this label, but the reality is, raise your hand if you know Yulia Mescala? Yulia? She's an immigrant, okay? She's only been out of Africa for a couple of years.
So she doesn't count.
So, yeah, first of all, she doesn't have a job, but if she was going to look for a job, okay, and she probably would not be counted. She would fly under the radar, okay? Illegal immigrants, definitely. Part of that lifestyle is typically off the books, all right? So, sure. What else? Discouraged workers. Let's say that you're somebody that's been looking for a job, and it's a really hard time to find a job, even though the unemployment rate is down to what now? 9%. If you're one of these people that have been looking for a job and you've given up, they don't get counted, okay? What happens is, one of the ways that we calculate the unemployment rate is we poll people. We call people up, we contact them and say, what's your job situation? And if you call somebody, and you work with the government, and you say, so are you looking for a job? And they say, I was. It's a hard job market. I gave up. They won't count you as unemployed. Which is kind of silly, right? But that's one of the weaknesses. So you need to know the weaknesses of how it's calculated. Uninterested? We call them discouraged workers. Discouraged workers. Bless you. Now, so I want to go back a little bit before I talk about the types of unemployment, and it's very similar to the reasons for unemployment. Under the way we define who is employed, okay? Because we're talking about unemployment, but like, who do we actually count as being employed? Raise your hand if you've got a family member that owns a store, owns a business. And keep your hand up if you've ever worked there. Yeah, a lot of times people expect their kids to work at the family business, right? Well, while you're working there, were you considered employed? If the government knew about it, would they consider you part? Because a lot of times they don't, right? You just help out. And most of the time you didn't get paid, right? Did you get paid? You didn't get paid. You didn't get paid, right? But were you employed? It's a difficult question.
If we were employed, but we weren't like W-2 because it's our family business, so doesn't that count since we're not paying taxes?
question. Quran mentioned something about 15 hours. Go to your book where it talks about this. It says, who are the unemployed? But then right after that, before the calculations we went over, it says, persons in the civilian labor force fall into one of two categories, employed or unemployed. Okay? According to the BLS, employed persons are, now BLS, you need to know what the BLS is. What does that stand for? Bureau, write this down, Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this is one of many government agencies that tracks stuff. Okay? They don't track prices, they track what's going on with the labor force, labor market, right? So according to the BLS, they're the people that officially calculate and then report the unemployment rate. Who do they count as employed? Okay? Because everybody else is going to be considered unemployed as a part of the civilian labor force, right? You are employed if you did any work for pay or profit during the survey reference week. All right? So they have a survey that they do electronically over the phone. All right? They take a sampling of people, and if you work for pay, fine. That's kind of obvious. All persons who did at least 15 hours of unpaid work in a family-operated enterprise. So maybe not 2 or 3 hours, but during that week, if you did 15 hours, I mean, that's a big chunk of time. 15 hours? Even if it's mom or dad's business, all right? Even if you're not getting paid, you're employed. That's what they consider. They consider you to be employed. Now, you might be going, wait a second, I didn't get any money for that. Why would they count me as employed? Well, maybe you didn't get a W-2, you were W-2'd, or they didn't actually put money in your hand, but did you get compensated perhaps? Probably. A lot of times, depending on the cultural norms of your family, it's expected that that's what you're going to do to earn your keep, right? You know what that means, earn your keep. You're going to do something to contribute to this family in exchange for having a roof over your head, getting fed, having clothes, us paying for tuition for you to go to school. That's how you're going to earn that, all right? Yes, your main job, we tell this to our kids at home, your main job is to go to school and do as well as you possibly can in school. But you also have chores, and for some families, part of those chores and expectations are helping out in the family business, right? So, were you compensated? You probably were, and that's why they count those people, right? Even if you didn't get money directly, you probably got financially compensated somehow because your parents are taking care of you, right? You're getting food, shelter, and clothing, the really important stuff. Does that make sense? Right? So that's some explanation for why they count you, even if it's non-paid, all right? All persons who are temporarily absent from their regular jobs because of illness, vacation, bad weather, industrial dispute, various personal reasons, all right? So if you're just temporarily absent, all right? If you go on maternity leave, you're not unemployed, okay? We have, female teachers here. You don't have to go very far to find females in the workplace that take maternity leave. Are they considered unemployed? No. All right? I took a leave when Christian was born 10 years ago at Notre Dame. That's one of the reasons I left. Because I was in the administration, I was a dean like Mr. Cantwell, and I said, this has been a really hard pregnancy, because it was. My wife was on bed rest for about 6 months. She couldn't really get up except to go to the bathroom and maybe take a shower. She had nurses come into the house. She had IV home therapy. It was a really, really difficult time. And it was obvious that once the baby came, it wasn't going to be like, okay, life's back to normal. I probably should have taken some time off before the baby even came, but I didn't. Because I just had a lot of responsibility. I was a dean, I was teaching, I was coaching football, I was doing all this crazy stuff. All right, but before the baby was born, I said, I'm going to take some time off myself. And I know, due to California law, I'm entitled to it. I'm not going to take maternity leave, I'm going to take paternity leave. That's the fatherly version. Paternity leave. To help with this newborn. And I'm going to take 2 weeks. I know I can take many more. And they were like, what? You're going to take paternity leave? Well, we've never had that happen here before at Notre Dame. No one's ever taken. I'm like, okay, I'll be the first, but I'm going to leave. And I know you can't fire me for it. And I didn't want to be a stinker about it, but without getting into my beefs with some people at Notre Dame, that's one of the ways they were kind of unrealistic and unreasonable. That's one of the reasons I left. Okay? But so I took it. Was I unemployed? Even though they didn't want me to take it? They didn't fire me. They couldn't have fired me. Otherwise, I would have sued them. So for those 2 weeks, I wasn't at work, but I wasn't unemployed. All right? Somebody's sick, somebody takes leave, whatever. All right? They're still counted as employed. And then you have a little more specific information about unemployed. All persons who did not have jobs made specific active efforts to find a job, not, I gave up, I'm taking some time off, I'm thinking about starting my own business, okay? But they were actively looking for a job during the prior 4 weeks and were available for work. They're also counted as unemployed, all these people that were not working and were waiting to be called back to a job from which they had been temporarily laid off. So those people would still count as unemployed, all right? This chapter, this chapter, along with chapter 6, for the most part, is a matter of memorization. Okay, it's not, okay, Mr. Gideon, can you go over that again and again and again? A lot of the semester is going to be like that later, all right? But for right now, this stuff is on you. So if you have questions, ask them, because I'll explain it in a different way, but I don't want to waste your time by taking too much time, because the main task for you is memorizing this stuff, memorizing formulas, knowing how to do some basic calculations, knowing, well, how, you know, what's the definition of being employed or unemployed, what are the labels that we use, job loser, job leaver, re-entrant, new entrant, those kinds of things. So are there any questions right now before we talk about the last piece of unemployment? Because then we're done with unemployment and prices. No? All right, so types of unemployment. Frictional unemployment, structural unemployment, natural unemployment. Frictional. Your book says everyday demand conditions change in some markets. In other words, thinking of a demand curve for product